Our team is sincerely appreciative of everyone here tonight. And some of you may have signed up to sit back and relax, and we want you to relax. We also want you, if you have a hot beverage, or if you're in a place where it's hot, something cold. But we really want to create the opportunity tonight to invite you to take this journey with us. It was very interesting when we were planning the salon. One member of our team, of course, one of our brilliant students, said, well, what do you think about if we structure the salon as an experiential journey, so that those who are coming to the salon can experience what we have the good fortune to experience in our weekly meetings? And so I'll ask if you will indulge us and really come along with us. Tonight, we want to have you get a sense of our origin story. How did we begin? How have we developed this narrative personality health psychology training model? So, like all good stories, I don't have to tell this audience the setting matters, the characters matter, the plots and complicating actions matter, codas matter. And so we invite you. I would like to let you know that as the storytelling unfolds and you experience this journey with us, we are going to be primarily pursuing two questions. One question is, when and how did I enter? And some of you may recognize that as a title of a book from a very distinguished scholar, Paula Giddens. When and how did I enter? So we want to take you along that journey. And then we also want you to get a sense of how we train and why it matters. And then we want to continue this journey by asking you to engage with us with your questions, with your comments. You should know that this salon was originally a proposal for the Society for Qualitative Inquiry in Psychology's conference. And we proposed it as a conversation hour. And this was 2 years ago, because we wanted to engage all of you with your expertise. So we invite you to join us on this experiential journey. Before we get into answering those questions, so you can learn about our storytelling, our origin story, what we thought was important was to give you a quick snapshot of place. Where is it that we do this work, and what's the significance of that? And then Dr. Mwenzawa will give you a snapshot of our training model. And then we will continue our storytelling with those two questions ahead of us. So I hope everyone has received our invitation to take this experiential journey with us. In terms of place, we all engage in this work at Howard University. Howard University is in Washington, D.C., in the nation's capital in the U.S. And our university was founded in 1867, and it's very significant that it was founded as a university. Many people know of Howard University today and understand it as having a historically Black college and university designation. And indeed, we do now, but that didn't exist at our founding. And what's also significant about where we do this work is that in 1867, when we were founded, our founders included the founding of a medical school, and they also admitted the first class of students that included a woman. And this is very significant because I believe that it wasn't until about 1930, for example, just to give you some cultural historical perspective, that Princeton admitted its first woman. And so I'd like to give that context to give you a sense of the place. And it was very multicultural. Many people think of Howard University and don't really realize that in many ways, particularly as it comes to student life, we created a diverse and inclusive environment back in the 1800s. So that's very significant to know in terms of place and where our story unfolds. The other thing to know about place is that where we are housed, all of us are, we're trained at Howard University. And our department, the Department of Psychology, is a unit within the Division of Natural Sciences in the College of Arts and Sciences at Howard. And some of you may know that the college is known for its distinguished professors of previous generations. So E. Franklin Frazier, Toni Morrison, Alain Locke, Everett Just, Herman Branson, and a host of others, Sterling Brown, and also the first African-American to earn a PhD in psychology was the first head of our department. And he was trained at Clark University. And that's very significant. And we've had the opportunity, I have had the opportunity to talk about the significance of the relationship between Clark in Worcester, Massachusetts, and Howard University. We have, all of us were trained in this department. So Danae, she was trained as a clinical psychologist in the PhD program at Howard. I was an undergraduate student and trained in the Department of Psychology. And Alexandria recently earned her Bachelor's of Science this spring with honors from our department. And Brianna also is training as a doctoral student in the department, which is very important. Our department, again, very important in terms of place and thinking about getting to know us as characters and our narrative identities. It's really important to understand that our department has made significant contributions to the field of psychology and curricular developments, also to having profound social impact, policy impact, and shaping human lives. And I want to highlight two examples. One is James Baton, who was maybe the third chair, I think, have to get my facts straight, of the Howard University Department of Psychology, but his pioneering research was working with Likert to create the Likert scale. But because of the cultural historical moment, he never was given credit for something we use all the time in psychology. And he was a tremendous scholar, a tremendous man. He was the chair when I was a student. And then the second person that we really want to highlight, for reasons that will be obvious in our story, is Mamie Phipps Clark. She was a student, a master's thesis student at Howard University in the Department of Psychology. And students who are here probably can relate to this. She was struggling, as we all do, with topics for her master's thesis project. And she decided she wanted to study identity. She was interested in education. She came to Howard as a physics and math major, but they said, no, you go over to psychology. Women don't do that. So she created this doll test that you might have heard about that's had a profound impact on how identity is studied. You've probably heard of her husband, Kenneth Clark. But what is really interesting and also sad is that it was Mamie Clark's work that was used in the Supreme Court case, Brown versus Board of Education. And that research transformed education in the United States. Now, we could debate whether, that change is good or bad, but the point is that this woman, as a student, had this profound influence. And unfortunately, because of the cultural historical times, when she moved to New York with her husband, who was Dr. Kenneth Clark, no university would hire her. So she started a child development center. And that is why the lawyers from Howard, Thurgood Marshall, Nabrett, and others had, in the NAACP, had Kenneth Clark present the research at the Supreme Court level. And so that is not the place of our story unfolding is so instrumental in terms of what we do and how we do it, that we thought we would be remiss if we did not set that context. That's our story setting. So I'd like to turn it over to you, Danae, to just give a snapshot of our model before we go into our where and how did I enter.
Okay, thank you, Cynthia. If you could share the screen for me, Brianna, right quick. Okay, here's our model. And I want you guys to particularly pay attention to the left-hand side of the model, because in essence, our training model incorporates the tenets that we often use in more traditional forms of training. So we indeed acknowledge that traditional forms of training are important. However, we include other training principles that are based on what we call core principles. And we espouse a training model that is first and foremost student-centered and with an emphasis on lifelong learning. And some people may ask, well, what does that mean? And so while the emphasis obviously is to train our students, we come in as research mentors, understanding that we too can learn from our students, and we have. And so while they look to us for knowledge, we want them to understand and know from the very beginning that because we are open to learning and we embrace the love of knowledge, that they too are bringing something to the table that we are open to learn. And I can say unequivocally, I've learned a lot. So anyway, We also value what we call flexibility and agility. And we want to utilize flexibility and agility in our approach to teaching, mentoring, and learning. And this is because, well, in the beginning, it had to be because it's all new. And so we were kind of like putting this together in a new way. So we knew that we had to have this kind of flexibility because, well, quite frankly, we didn't really know where this was going. So, but it has really helped us in our overall mission, which is to promote health and wellness. We are also tenacious when it comes to what it is that we are doing in this training model, and we are tenacious in terms of our commitment to health and wellness within the Black community. And as a consequence of this commitment to the health and wellness of the Black community, this allows us to be accountable not only to ourselves within this group, but also to the people that we serve. And we hope that by embracing these core values, we are able to embrace our authentic selves and embody health and wellness. What do I mean by that? We want to truly make sure that we can be who we want to be, and that by being who we want to be and allowing ourselves to be authentic, we in essence will embody the very thing that we're studying and then translate that into what it is that we're doing as researchers. Our group came together as a consequence because we wanted to combine the epistemological, theoretical, and methodological approaches to narrative personality as well as health psychology fields. And we wanted to do this in order to address some of the most pressing health concerns that face the Black community. I don't have to tell many of you, unfortunately, we are disproportionately impacted by almost every chronic disease out there. And so we want to make sure that by joining these two worlds, we can indeed address this disparities. And then we are going to, in essence, use the scientist practitioner model, because we are a PhD program at the graduate level. So we embrace the scientist practitioner model. And we focus on both idiographic and nomothetic approaches to understanding the lived experiences of Black people in order to ultimately promote overall health and wellness within the community. So that briefly describes our model, and I'm sure at the end, you guys will have plenty of questions. So,
right.
Cynthia?
And suggestions. Thank you so much, Danae. So now you have a snapshot of our setting. You have a snapshot of our model. So let's get deeper into our storytelling. So let's tell our origin story. How did all of this start? Brianna, would you like to start us off? Okay.
I'll kick us off. And it's a pleasure and honor to be here with this team, with this collaborative, and then with you all today. It's a pleasure to start us off. And I think this is so unique and special to me because I popped the question that gave birth to this collaborative. So I came to Howard University straight out of undergrad at 22. My first year, I was eager to work with Dr. Mendua in her Health Park lab, where we studied cardiovascular risk factors and health disparities in African Americans. And I really loved the work that we did. And I had a number of different clinical experiences alongside my research that really helped emphasize the importance of theoretical conceptualizations. The most important thing about a strong theoretical conceptualization is that it guides everything you do, how you approach the problem. And what I knew is that there had to be some flexibility in how we approach problems. And so I had a number of different research experiences inside Howard and outside of Howard that had some questions roaming in my head about, I don't know about these survey questionnaires. I don't know about kind of putting people in these boxes of what they should be, how they should answer a question. And so I was talking to Dr. Mendel one night, and I was like, I was a little hesitant, and I said, you know, Dr. M, I was thinking, what do you think about a qualitative study? And this is in my third year when I'm like in the crunch time of thinking about my dissertation topic. And this is a pretty radical approach because we had not been doing this work in our lab thus far. And I was also proposing a new research topic in a content area that she had no idea about. We studied cardiovascular risk factors, and I approached her about reproductive health, reproductive and sexual health. And she was like, oh, okay. Let me think about that. And she said, well, I have an idea. Let me go talk to some people that I know, and I'm gonna get back to you because I think we can make this work. And then she shared some of her, which she'll share with you as well, some of her passions and her story about how she came into this work and her interest in health psychology and that foundational understanding of psychological well-being from a whole person, holistic perspective. So I was like, okay, well, maybe we can make this thing work. So that summer, she talked to Dr. Winston Proctor, and Dr. Winston Proctor gave us all these articles to read. And we were like, oh, we're gonna have to meet every week to get through these articles. And we're not talking about any old, 1-page article or 12 pages even. We're talking about karate, very different physiological, philosophical approaches and epistemological approaches that we had not been exposed to in the depth that we were through these articles. So we would meet every week, and we read, and then we had a ton of questions. And then we were kind of brainstorming back and forth, and we were like, well, we need some assistance. So come fall, we met with Dr. Winston Proctor, and our collaborative was born then. So I'll pass it over.
Okay, well, I guess we should segue right to me because, well, I was the dissertation advisor who, in essence, she was so sweet. What she was trying to really tell me was, I am not interested in what you are doing at all. And that, really this cardiovascular thing that you're doing, well, it's not me. And, the thing that I say to Brianna, I was so glad that I had created an atmosphere in the lab that allowed her to pretty much say, Dr. M, I can't do this. And so, honestly, when she started talking about this whole qualitative approach, obviously it is totally a different epistemological approach to, understanding a phenomenon. I was like, oh, well, I can remember when I literally accosted Cynthia when I first started as a tenure track faculty, saying, I'm going to do this thing called narrative work. It's some kind of way. And I call her Cindy. So some kind of way, we're going to work together. Unlike we're going to bring these two worlds together because I am convinced that health behavior change will take place one narrative at a time. I remember saying that to her. Mm-mm. And I mean, that was almost 15 years ago. And so I, of course, went on my trajectory of doing Likert scale kinds of phenomenon, and measurements, and using the quintessential approach that everybody wants you to do when you're tenure track, but never really being satisfied totally by what I was doing. And so I said I was going to take the leap with my graduate student, and that I was going to read Dr. Bamberg. We had to read you, Dr. Bamberg, and we had to read Dr. McMullen, you know, and we had our own little journals, and with a lot of question marks going, huh, what? It was humbling, but because we embraced lifelong learning, and this was something I knew at some point I really wanted to do, what better time to do it than that summer? I was full professor. You know, there was nothing else for me to strive for, you know, like this is the opportunity for me to learn to do what it is that I said I wanted to do 15 years ago. And even though, you know, I wasn't particularly all that interested in sexual health and well-being, we found somebody who could, you know, be on the committee that could help with that part. I knew I wanted to learn this new approach to apply to what it is that I am passionate about, which is cardiovascular disease risk. And so when I approached Dr. Cynthia Winston Proctor, she was like, okay, well, you know, I have a lot I have to do over the summertime, so I'm going to give you all these articles. We're going to put them in Dropbox, and we'll see you in September. I said, okay. And so I saw her in September with all the articles and all the question marks, and I'm going to turn it over to her because I'm interested in really knowing how she felt when I truly accosted her in the hallway of Howard University.
Well, it's funny, you know, to hear, as we know, as researchers, you know, the origin story, or if you're in a relationship and you ask two people how they met and got married, sometimes the stories. And I would say that, you know, I perceived that moment that she asked me as a blessing that I have been praying for. She said 15 years, what she, you know, envisioned. And for me, it was absolutely phenomenal, full circle moment, because one thing I did not mention about our department is that we are very wedded, as you can imagine, that's why I told you about our history, to methodologies, and sometimes putting the methodological cart before the horse, as the Gergens remind us. And so we are well versed in experimental psychology, generations and generations after. And so for me, you know, in the hallway outside of my undergraduate mentors' office, I see Danae, and she's my homegirl. Like, we grew up together, and she's talking about narrative. I said, yeah, we're going to do that one day. You know, in the meantime, let's just, you know, have each other's back. And so when Brianna was the catalyst, and the timing was just perfect. And it was a full circle moment because, you know, some of you may know this and some of you may not, but narrative personality psychology, how many of you are asking, well, what in the world is that? I had the opportunity, I didn't know what it was. And I went to a conference, and serendipitously, there was a professor out there in the audience who heard me talking about wanting to study lives. I was trained at Michigan as a survey researcher. That's what they said. You're a survey researcher. But I had questions that were about people's lives and stories. And this professor sitting out there in the audience with my students, my undergrads and my graduate students, looking at me present, reached out to me and said, hey, I'm starting this narrative consortium at Clark. And it was our new president, Dr. Michael Bamberg. And I say it's a full circle moment because that's when I learned about narrative psychology. I didn't know it existed. And then I was in a personality position serendipitously too. Unfortunately, my undergraduate personality professor passed away and I got his position. I was like, hey, I study identity and motivation. I can do personality. And so sometimes I say, I feel like I kind of created this, self that says I'm a narrative personality psychologist. And so I felt so affirmed and no longer alone in my home. At Howard, I was alone. People said, oh, that's nice stuff, Cynthia. That's great you do that. That's nice. Okay. But nobody wanted to go on that journey with me. And with Danae and Brianna, they didn't want me just to pour out, this is what it is. They wanted to think about it critically. They were learning side by side. And it was a perfect time in my career because I've spent most of my career, mentoring students and training students at the undergraduate and graduate level, because that's what we do at Howard. We produce the most, undergrads, African Americans, and other Black groups who go on and get PhDs. And, that's fine and good, but it was perfect timing. And so I felt no longer alone. And I was so blown away by Brianna deciding that she was going to delay applying for internship. She's a clinical psychology student. And those of you who are clinical psychologists, students and professors, that was huge. And we don't have a lot of funding, but she was curious, she was committed, and she was courageous. And so it was a win-win. And so for me, the Narrative Personality Health Psychology Collaborative and the model that we created was just such a great opportunity for us to come together and create something that we really believe in. That's my story and I'm sticking to it. And Alexandria, why don't you tell your story, your origin story for, when and how you entered the Narrative Personality Health Psychology Collaborative.
Yeah, I would absolutely love to. So as you all are hearing about this journaling club that took place over that summer, and then they said, okay, we're gonna meet back up in September. Well, in that September, I was a junior in my undergraduate career and I was new into the honors college. I was about a year behind everyone else because I came in late, but I knew I wanted to be in the honors college. And so I essentially begged and wrote my way in. But at that point, I needed an advisor to help me work on my undergraduate thesis. And so I emailed Dr. Winston Proctor that September. And I remember looking through all of our professors. And at the time, I wasn't quite sure what I knew I wanted to study, but I thought, well, I had an HR internship and I kind of like IO psychology, and under research interest, I saw STEM education and workforce development. And I thought, oh yes, that's what I'll get into right away. But after our first conversation, I quickly realized that it would not be so singular a journey. And part of how I realized that is because to myself, an undergraduate at the time, my understanding of how getting into a research group worked was you learn with the professor and then whatever they want you to do, you just do that. And that is how you learn. You basically just watch everyone and you do grunt work. But when we started talking, it wasn't about, okay, so here are my interests, Alexandria. It was, okay, Alexandria, what are your interests? And so we talked about my interest in the classics and in television and film and journalism and linguistics. And we were speaking about these topics not as extraneous hobbies, but as sort of keys to understanding. And that's what they ended up being, because I had ignored initially that first research interest, which was narrative psychology. And so when it came to, okay, what do you know about narrative psychology? I said, well, I don't know, but I know about stories. And I'm coming off the heels of having read the Iliad And I'm thinking about epics, and I'm thinking about the stories we tell about ourselves now and in the past, and the way we all relate through narrative. And I said, oh, I love narratives. I write narratives. And immediately my preconceptions were starting to be turned over. Another preconception that you have as an undergraduate coming in that I had was that I would either be alone working with Dr. Winston Proctor one-on-one, doing citations, whatever she needed, or I would be in a group at the bottom of the totem pole, coming in behind other professors and then graduate students, and then it would be myself. But instead I found myself in this collaborative in the truest sense of the word, because that first meeting, after I'd been emailed the karate and Nick Adams, I was not just saying, okay, now let me listen to them discuss this, but they're like, okay, so what do you think about these different epistemological approaches? And it wasn't just, okay, I'm going to give my opinion and take it as gospel, but they were listening to me and hearing my opinions and my thoughts as valid, because they knew that I was reading and learning and training in the same way that they were. And while we were at different levels of stature, it didn't take away from what I had to contribute to the group. And so after that, it was this immediate ramping up of growing, reading all the things that they were reading over the summer, talking about them, sitting in on meetings, talking about, oh, well, I'm thinking about this from a journalistic point of view, if we're thinking about how to do interviews, and then growing together in that way, because we were all coming from such different places, but wholly trained in and targeting and focused on the health and well-being of the Black community and Black women. And so it became this fantastic opportunity to work on individual and collaborative projects, each of which we would take time to support one another in. And it is an experience and a group that I did not foresee myself entering, but one which at this point I couldn't have been here without being there with them. So as I'm even thinking about and reminiscing on the training model that we introduced at the top, and hopefully some folks are starting to see all of those three components weaved in throughout our stories, I really want to continue to kind of dig deeper in our conversation and think through how it is that we train. Why that matters, not just to us individually, but kind of what makes this that truly matters as a group. So Brianna, I don't know if you want to kind of kick it off again in that regard.
Yes, I think so much, I mean, as you've heard, so much of this group is based on those core values. And one of the core values that has stuck with me has always been a part of my training with Dr. Mendwa, and as it really expanded within our collaborative, is the authenticity. And that has helped me personally within my journey, the reflexivity within my research, as well as being a clinician, and really thinking about what do I want from my research and clinical career? What do I want that to look like? And this group started at such a pivotal time where I'm developing my dissertation research topic, and I'm about to apply for an internship, which is kind of similar to an MD residency. And I'm like, oh, I'm almost having a little bit of an existential crisis, because I'm like, well, who am I really? I've drastically shifted my research, and I'm now entering into this new world of qualitative research and narrative identity, and I'm learning all these things, and they are so easily applicable to my clinical interests. And I knew I was really wedded and invested to both the bidirectional impact of my research on my clinical work and vice versa. So I was applying, last year I was applying to internship, and I was really, really struggling with my autobiographical essay. And I came to Dr. Mendwa and Dr. Winston Proctor, and I said, hey, this autobiographical essay, I don't know I know they want a story, but what kind of story, what part of the story? I mean, it it was a lot to kind of really hone in on. And one of the questions that changed everything about my approach to this essay was just tell your story. It doesn't matter who's listening. It doesn't matter who is on the other side of it. As long as you're authentic, that's what matters. So then I said, okay, well, that's nice, but that still doesn't help me as much to try and think about, okay, what do these people really want to know from me? So I sat back and I started thinking about, well, what am I passionate about and what are my goals and matters? And I knew that my dissertation topic developed because I was so interested in the nuances of understanding how we come to know ourselves as sexual beings. That was very important to me, and it drove most of my the development of my research question. And then I segued into, okay, I'm very passionate about African American health. So what would be a turning point for me in that? And so I developed this essay based on that passion and kind of walking through those questions. And had Dr. Mendela and Dr. Winston Proctor read it, and they helped edit it. And they always ask me that question, is this you? Is this what you're trying to say? And constantly ask me to be reflective throughout the process. And not only is that helpful for me as a qualitative researcher, especially doing the kind of work that I'll be doing, which is 3 different types of analysis: a narrative structural analysis, a thematic analysis, a discursive analysis, and my dissertation, which is a pretty ambitious proposal that we developed. But I think at the core of that is the reflexivity and being able to understand my positionality within all of that. And that is how I structured my autobiographical essay. So come January, I was on my internship interviews and everyone asked me about that essay. It was like the talk of every interview. And I was like, I had to come back and tell them, like, do you know that everyone keeps asking me about this essay? And then I reread it and I'm like, oh, it's actually really, really good. But I think what makes it so good is that understanding, that self-awareness, and that authenticity that comes through in my interviews that matched what was on the essay. And so without this collaborative though, and without that push to be more authentic and confident in what that authenticity is for me, it wouldn't have been possible to create that essay or even get the internship that I have now at Duke University in the medical center, really doing what I wanted to do, which is understand sexual health in cancer survivors. So I think I wanted to share that story because it really, really hits home those core values.
So I know that we definitely want to engage with those who are taking this journey with us. And so I'll just say to my team, we could move more into the direction of continuing the why NPHPC and why it matters. I mean, we've heard a little bit from each of us about where we are in our various academic, educational, and professional journeys. So I'm just wondering, team, if we want to, move right into our last part of the discussion, just for a couple of minutes, maybe 5 to 6, so we have time, in terms of, the so what, how do we train, and why does it matter? Are there any other stories that you think are important for us to share about that, or, the more about what the entry point means in terms of our professional and even our personal lives?
I think it would be a good idea to go into the next phase in terms of, the why, and I think our why stories are very powerful. I can speak for myself in terms of why I wanted to do something different. I was your quintessential graduate student. I didn't sleep much, ate horribly. I did not engage in any kind of self-care. Along the way, I got married on internship. I got pregnant. You would have thought I had caught a disease, how they treated me. I don't mind disclosing this, but I died in childbirth. And I was back on internship in 5.5 weeks. And I lived my entire academic just doing. I wasn't being, I was just doing. One thing after the other, after the other, after the other. I mean, I begin to tell you, my son was sick the first 4 years of my academic career, starting as a tenure track professor. He had 4 surgeries in 5 years. One almost lost his life. Just kept on going. I got tenure right on time. 3 years later, I was full professor. And next thing I know, I am looking at just sickness after sickness after sickness. I'm just sick. And I'm like, well, what kind of health psychologist am I? And I realized that I was not incorporating in my own life the things I was studying. You know, the very person that sparked me to even go down this journey was from a character from the movie Soul Food. I don't know if any of you guys know this, but the protagonist is about a 59-year-old African-American woman who had diabetes so bad that she put her hand on the stove and she didn't feel it. And I thought to myself, well, hell, I don't want to be that. That's no protagonist of mine. You know, I don't want this for my life. But, you know, that's what, it's almost like we wear it as a badge of honor to be sick, downtrodden, and exhausted all the time. And so I decided somewhere along those lines, this is not what I want for my students. I don't want them to be like how I am at the age that I am now. In my 50s, you know, in my 50s, and, you know, battling illness after illness. I wanted something different for them. I wanted them to truly be a whole person, to embrace, yes, their academic lives, you know, filled with academic rigor, but also have a outside life, you know. And so I said, I have to develop a model, a training model that truly reflects what it is that I want for the next generation, particularly the next generation of African-American women. And so I remember coming to Dr. Winston Proctor saying, Cindy, you're broke down too. You've been on the track of doing too. Do you want to do something different? You want to do something differently? And she was like, I do.
Yes.
Yeah, I do not want this. And so we just decided we were going to tell the truth, say, you know, and be our authentic selves with these students. No, this is not easy. Yes, we forget, you know, we did all of that so they would get a glimpse into what it's like truly to be an academic woman, a Black woman in academia. You know, we didn't try to dress it up and make it pretty. You know, it is what it is. And I want you to learn from that. And I think that this model, I hope, has set that stage for them. You know, because I want something different for the both of them and all the students that I've trained. You know, I didn't say this, but I've been at Howard 15 years and managed to produce 10 PhD students. Do you know how many students that is in 15 years? I'm like, that's just too much. I don't want this for them. I want something better. So I set out to do something better for them. And so I hope you guys can give us feedback, because that's the mission, to do something better for them so we can do something better for the community. So that's my story.
I'm really glad that you know, went there. And I think it's important to just tell the story of, we were in WeWork. That's where our collaborative unfolded away from campus. And, we just did this organically in terms of the authenticity and embodiment and wanting something different. You can want it, but the question is how. And so we ended up, again, organically developing a weekly research meeting agenda that starts with a greeting. I don't remember in graduate school, unfortunately, anyone at the beginning of a lab research meeting saying, "How are you doing? How is it going?" And listening. Maybe they did, but we do that to start out. I mean, and we have tons of work to do. And Howard is, yes, it's a university, but it's teaching focused. And so, we have 600, 700 undergraduate majors, 90 PhD students, and about 6 faculty with active programs of research. And I mention this because the greeting is how we set the tone. We also integrate mindfulness in these meetings, and they're super productive. We can still be productive as scholars and productive as, whole beings. And that's really important to how we operate and function with honesty throughout the entire pandemic. This was the only research or teaching professional obligation that I felt like I could just show up how I was, that I didn't have to have some certain kind of physical appearance, which is challenging when you have MS. People say, "Oh, you look great," but you could feel terrible. I didn't have to say, I could say, "I don't feel well." And the group could say, "Hey, have you done these things?" But they can also embrace me and say, "But we know you still want to talk about that article, or you still want to design that study," and find a way to help me do that. And during COVID, again, showing up, in the bed, I could meet with them and there was no judgment. And so I think it's really important to think about how we train our students and what we can let unfold organically if we trust them and trust ourselves. And we have to embody it. I'm a consulting psychologist too, working with, professional women to take care of themselves. So, these 2 students sparked it and this cross-generational brilliance has just been incredible for us.
And I even really want to build on that idea of, how we've structured our meetings to include mindfulness and greeting one another, and thinking about how we do those things and are still productive. Because I think the first thought that people often go to is, well, it sounds like you're coddling. And how are you going to produce, like you mentioned, Dr. Winwa, academic rigor if you're coddling your students? And I think it comes to the point where, okay, what sort of student are we trying to train? What sort of researcher, clinician, practitioner are we trying to train who cannot care for oneself, let alone someone else? And thinking that we do not have to sacrifice, we do not have to build academic rigor by forcing trauma upon students. And how we do that is a question I'm thinking through presently with students that I have. Right now, I'm in the middle of my gap year and I'm teaching Latin at a boarding school in New Hampshire. And that same grad school mentality of staying up all night long and breaking yourself down, I'm seeing in these 13, 14-year-old kids, because that's the life that they want to lead. So they're starting it now. And so we're thinking through these really tough questions that are going to radiate through the academic community of how can we build academic rigor? How can we build informed students without forcing them to break themselves by the time they're 25? And so I think one of those things that Dr. Wilson-Crocker mentioned is that trust that we have in one another. I can trust that we will all not only do the work that we need to do because we are thoroughly passionate about it, but because we are passionate about the community that we're serving, which just happens to include ourselves. And so I know that, okay, I'm going to read this, however, 40-page article, and they will have read it too. But also, if something is happening in my personal life, I can entrust that information with them. So it wasn't just that I showed up to this group and yes, we're going to work on my thesis. My thesis is certainly born of this group, nature of it, the introduction to Dr. McMullen's work, which inspired it. But beyond that, it was thinking through questions of, you know, do I take a gap year? How do I apply to graduate school? Things that I'd never considered or thought of before, and needed people who have been in these positions before, who cared about my well-being, yes, and my future, academically, socially, psychologically, spiritually, all of those things wrapped up into one. I could entrust them with these questions, knowing that they would give me truly informed answers. And all of that goes back to what we talked about at the beginning, which is that there is no hierarchy amongst us, in the sense that we all show each other respect, in that we give each other the professionalism that is due the moment, and we give each other the honesty and the authenticity that is due the moment. And so it's not quite a story, but it is the way that I see these tenets directly living out in my life. And hopefully I can see them living out in the lives of my current students, because I do see that change that needs to happen for them, because it matters if what we're radiating about academia is break yourself down or build yourself up, and we want to do the latter. So
Thank you, Alexandria. I'm wondering, should we just open it up now? Is there anything else that anyone wants to? We have plenty of stories, working on a white paper. We're going to be doing this work for the rest of our careers. Thank you so much for being with us on this journey. The other ritual that we have is an affirmation at the end. So Danae has agreed, when we finish with our conversation, question and answers, engaging you, that there will be a, that there will be a affirmation, so you get the full experience. So if you can stay with us, it's a maybe 15-second.
Oh yeah, I got a short
That
one.
goes a whole week for us. So let's open it up. Thank you so much, though, for indulging us in our narrative personality health psychology training model story. And it's not over. We're just at the beginning.
So at this point, like Dr. Winston Proctor said, we'll transition to the question and answer, and we'll invite people to ask their questions maybe initially in the chat feature, and we'll just kind of see how that goes. We'll have about 17 minutes.
I know this isn't a bashful group. See my friend over there, Mark. Hi. Another person got me into this work.
And if there's no direct question, any kind of reflections on what it is that we have shared, and any kind of feedback in terms of what you're thinking about the model, any of that, we would welcome.
Mark, I see your hand up. I wonder if would you?
Yeah, just I'm kind of taken aback by the pressure dimension that you and Alexandria and some other talked about. I mean, I understand that that's real, but it really does strike me that there's something really troubling about that, because not only is it the case that it's imperative to move beyond that kind of pressure cooker feeling, but in doing the kind of work that qualitative and narrative work requires, it's really important to experience one's own freedom and possibility for creativity. And so the fact that even in the kind of wonderful program that you're sponsoring and cultivating, there's still that pressure to produce and to accommodate and so on. I just wonder whether there are ways of counteracting some of that, you know, because I really do see the qualitative movement and the narrative movement as being a place where some of that can be resisted and where people's creative capacities can be exercised and people's freedom. So I just wonder whether you have anything to say about that.
Well, I guess my first reaction is I'm not sure. I think I think we can transform by more of us doing, sorry, my son's not here. So I have my ringer on. I think models like this and continuing really to have the next generation help us with this, you know, is something to, you know, target. I think it helps that we now have outlets for scholarship like our journal, Qualitative Psychology, because, you know, quite frankly, you know, the academic university model was set up, you know, for people who could live a life of leisure, you know, and the way it was, you know, set up. I just think that, and now, unfortunately, with technology, the pressure to produce impacts your very being, if we were to think of Maslow, in order to survive. And for the students that we teach, unfortunately, and many of you teach, you know, this is their one shot. You know, our students come out of impoverished backgrounds, and, you know, unfortunately, our field has gotten so focused on, you know, the meat grinder and the bean counting. So I think we can do it as a society, and I think the next generation can really, you know, push us. Like, I think of Nisha's work, it's just phenomenal. You know, I'd be curious how, you know, her students can do that work. That's my response. And it's really the society can do it, our society for qualitative inquiry, and the next generation. That's my take.
And I'll just quickly say, you know, everything that Dr. Winston Proctor is saying, and the whole idea that, you know, people like, you know, in our generation, you know, really changing the way in which we approach things. Like, we have got to be the instruments of change. So like, I can remember Brianna saying to me when she decided she wanted to do something different. I mean, and totally different. You know, her master's thesis was a quantitative, you know, traditional master's thesis. And when she came to me, and I can remember telling my colleagues, you know, she wants to do something totally different. They were like, and you're gonna allow that? I'm like, allow it? It's her passion. It's what she wants to do. Like, the dissertation is supposed to be about what she wants to do. And to, I mean, I was in the position to kind of look at them and all, you know, say, of course I'm doing this, because of course, by this time I'm no longer tenure track, you know, I have some, you know, way in which I can just be like, you know, go blow off or whatever, you know, but I can only imagine, you know, what my response may have been if I were not a tenure track professor. You know, But now I'm in that position. And so I have to use that position to advocate for something differently. And so, and leading by example. And it hasn't always been easy. I mean, our colleagues sometimes think Dr. Winston Proctor and I are like, you know, yes, flighty. I mean, those flighty people, but, we are invested in it. And so I think, while I think the next generation is going to do wonders, I think people like us who can, start to do things differently, given our position of power, we should do it. I embraced Brianna's decision wholeheartedly because this is what Brianna wanted to do. So I don't know if that answers the question, but.
Yeah, I want to read some of the questions and comments. coming
Okay,
in
because
from
I
the
can't
chat.
see them.
Yeah, let me, Michael said, thank you all. What stands out to me is really the relational work you're promoting, which runs counter to the competitive current that runs through academia at all levels of learning, teaching, admin work everywhere. And so I just want to give you a chance to address that, as well.
Amen. And thank you for recognizing that's exactly what we're up to, I would say. I don't know. Alexandria, what's your response?
Yeah.
Not to put you on the spot, but
No, I absolutely agree. I think that idea of like this competitive current, which only grows more and more competitive as time goes on, because people realize, okay, like the amount of times that I've heard in my undergraduate degree, well, it went from being the undergraduate degree is the new high school degree to the master's degree is the new undergraduate degree to the doctoral degree is the new master's degree. And now it's like, okay, so we all have to just go full speed ahead for the purposes of beating out somebody else. And I think that in this group, it becomes a place where I'm not looking to beat out anybody who's here. I'm looking to grow with them. And so, yeah, you're totally right about that occurring at all levels of learning.
Thanks.
Yeah, Brianna, what was it like in Health Park?
Yeah, I was actually thinking about that too, because we have a hierarchical system of mentoring within Health Park, and it's a little different than it was within the collaborative. Very similar tenets, but the way it was structured, it was different. So the more senior or advanced graduate students will help bring, so as a third year, I'd be helping a first year and so on. You can kind of pay it forward. And it was always so I came in as a first year under a third or fourth year, and I was helping her in her dissertation. And it was such an amazing experience to be able to like have input on her dissertation. Like she asked me questions, well, what do you think? What do you think? I'm like, I'm a first year. Like, I don't know anything. I don't know what you want me to, and what input you might want from me. But she genuinely wanted that feedback and that genuine, what genuinely I had to contribute to the conversation or to her project. And so I did the same thing when I started my topic. I asked a lot for feedback. I was very open and receptive to it. I asked Alexandria what she thought. She was very instrumental in how I developed my protocol. And even I think it's very important to just kind of keep it at the same level when it comes to just flow of knowledge and freedom to experiment and think about things openly. And that's how you become enlightened. There's no way you can stay that rigid and not be able to think innovatively in that way. So Health Park set the stage for me being able to, my own experience into first year, and then kind of now being at this stage I feel very much equal to anyone else, where I ask questions, I get feedback, and it's no judgment there. And I don't fear judgment. I trust that my colleagues will give me honest feedback.
And it requires, for us faculty, I think it requires us to be willing, the authenticity to be vulnerable and you know, I mean, we share very openly, like what this life is like. And we love it. I mean, not the life, not the grind and all of that, but the narrative personality psychology and me being able to, you know, learn how health psychologists study health and well-being outside of life satisfaction, because in personality psychology, that's kind of the outcome that we look at. And for the community that I'm interested in, other communities, I want more. I want to know more. But it does require a lot of vulnerability. And so like Danae, I don't know if I would have done this as an assistant tenure track professor. I did a lot of other kind of radical things, but I don't know about that. I did narrative psychology. So anyway.
Dr. Bamber, you had a follow-up. I saw that you.
Right. Thank you. I was just also wondering whether this notion of relational as something that is a thread through what you experienced in your careers, but also in your relationship with each other. You know, I see this connection to the methodology, not just with narrative, I think with a number of other qualitative methods, or possibly even with a qualitative idea where the boundaries between participants and researcher are much more part of something that is relational. So I think this, and I don't think it's just a metaphor. It's a framework. Linda Tuhifai-Smith brings this into, you know, a way of looking at methodology in a way that is taking the kind of individualism and the competitiveness out of our work, and it's hard to overcome. And you know, I don't want to harp this, but I think it's particularly difficult if you're brought up male with this competitive framework to slowly begin to think qualitatively, or you call it narratively. So I think this is a much larger framework, or it is a larger framework than I ever thought it is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's interesting because I can remember when I started out some years ago. I teach individual psychotherapy because my background is in clinical, and I also teach health psych, both at the graduate level. And when I sit and I say to the students that I am here as a function of the fact that I have more experience. But that doesn't mean I can't learn from you. So I kind of set the stage at the beginning of my class that this structure is not a hierarchy in the way in which I want you to think about hierarchy. I'm not the all-knowing professor that you need to sit down here and listen to and learn from. Well, first of all, I don't think I'm that interesting. So I much rather hear and know and what you're thinking. Like when you read an article, I want to know what you're thinking about the article. I already know what I'm thinking about the article. To me, it's far more interesting to know what you're thinking about the article. And we can share and exchange ideas. And I am amazed at how long it really takes students to kind of acclimate to that kind of a style, because they're really waiting for me to be like, I'm sitting here, you listen to me, and not only do you listen to me, you better regurgitate back what I've just told you, because I'm erudite. And I'm so like, you know, not that person. And it's to me it's not conducive to truly fostering critical thinking. You know, I want the hierarchy to cease to exist in my classroom so that we can truly embrace knowledge. You know, the acquisition of knowledge. And if you're only worried about what it is that you think I want you to say, you know, to get that A, I don't know. I just think it just does something to the whole point of coming to graduate school, undergraduate school, to learn.
I want to.
And for qualitative research, or all research, the critical thinking emphasis is so important to how we do our work and rethink our work and position ourselves. And so this model really also lends itself to that. I see Lisa and Linda also had comments.
And I just want to also say we're reaching on time, so it's 7:30 now.
Okay.
And so I think it's important to say out loud the other comments because they're quite beautiful. Lisa Oswald's, I think many of us have been somewhat traumatized by the system, so it's difficult to imagine that another way is genuinely possible. I found this empowering, and all of you inspirational. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And Linda,
yeah.
and Linda says, thank you for what you've given us today. There's so much that could be said. I'm wondering how the values, relationality, and collaborative ethos you create has influenced how you've thought about your research topics, questions, methodological approaches, analytical processes, and dissemination strategies. A very large question. And we may not have time. I think I can stay another 10 minutes. So for folks who do need to leave at 7:30, but if we want to keep the conversation going for another 10 minutes, I can keep that open if people want to address that as well, because it is a big question and an important one. So maybe I will say that for those of you that do need to leave, this is the time. And I don't know, Cynthia, if you feel like do you want to end it now, or do you want to address that question?
Well, I want to address that question, but I'm wondering if for the people who have to leave, and I think just only 10 more minutes or so, I'm wondering if Danae, you can do the affirmation so those that have to leave get the full experience of how we end our meeting every week.
Yes. So yes, every week we end with a affirmation, and it's centered around a theme. So today's affirmation is centered around the theme of excellence. So here's the affirmation. We are what we repeatedly do. Excellence then is not an act, but a habit, by Aristotle. So that's how we end. So
thank you. And thank you those who have to leave for your evening time, and for your comments. And again, we're just starting out, so we look forward to more insight from you. We will probably propose this as a conversation hour again, because we do want to be in conversation. I only wish we were in person, but one day.
Yeah.
So we put the affirmation. Yes, I will. Yeah, I will do it. I want to quickly just respond to Dr. McMullen, because honestly, I think for me, the biggest growth for me in terms of how I've approached my research, especially now, because I am the health psychology researcher that has utilized very traditional research methods. This group has humbled me to in a way that I now understand that I can't fully grasp what it must be like for an African-American woman to be battling obesity, say for instance, without hearing her lived experience. Period. The end. There is no scale that can truly capture what it's like, for someone to tell you or to determine for you what is healthy. think about using BMI, for instance. And I have begrudgingly used BMI. You know, just even using that, I'm determining for someone else what it means to be heavy and thin. And so this whole process truly has been humbling, because the nature of what it is that I do and the fact that I want to bring about change in behavior, and to totally ignore the lived experiences in the way in which I was ignoring them, because I was, you know, doing the most expedient thing, which is to do what? Do a Likert scale. You know, it has just changed my life. So that's my one experience I can say, you know. So, and I'm gonna put the affirmation in the chat. Okay, Cynthia, I'm sorry.
It's, no worries. I just, again, wonderful question. I hope we can keep in dialogue about this question. For me, you know, I have totally changed the way I've thought about what narrative identity is as an inner narrative that's curated and edited, and health. Because again, I think that personality psychology hasn't really scratched the surface there. And because of what's going on in the world, this collaborative and these students have inspired me to change direction a little bit in terms of engaging in more translational work as we are designing and doing our studies. And my pipe dream is to get engaged in and develop narrative medicine translations. And we have a hospital and a medical school at Howard, so we really could start there. But there's so many ways in which understanding who people are and their narratives, I mean, we even can see that in COVID, is so important. And we have these cultural strengths that nurses, doctors, they're not trained to listen to the stories we tell about how we show up. And so I think for me, you know, this has been a game changer in terms of, you know, looking in the long term, really hoping to be able to develop doctors and nurses and other practitioners who know how to, and trained in medical school, to tap into individuals' inner stories as they're curated. And then in the moment, there are far too many African-American women who are dying in childbirth. Danae mentioned herself, me, Serena Williams, and it was a matter of not being heard or listened to in terms of the stories we were trying to tell about our own bodies that we know. So I'm really interested in narrative medicine as a result of this.
Yeah.
And to kind of piggyback off of you, Dr. Winston Proctor, my experience as a clinician really helps really leverage some of the relational aspects of the work that we do. I think that one of the ways you can elicit a story is being able to hear, as Dr. Mendwa would say, and was well known in the clinical field of listening with the third ear, and really being able to not listen for the story in the way you think it should be told to you, but being able to hear and listen the full breadth and depth of the story. And I think this is so important for women, especially African-American women who have a long cultural history of trauma, of, especially in my work with sexual health, really understanding the trauma to their bodies. And breast cancer, the ways we make decisions about what kind of treatments they get is not based on a conversation, it's based on being told. And so the reality of their health is really been dictated to them, and having the opportunity to allow them to have a more collaborative and constructive way of telling their story is vastly different. And so that is what I hope our group develops an intervention around, how, or protocol on how to elicit that story, and really understanding the ways in which stories can be told is vastly different. And bringing the Black woman's story to the table is just one way of listening to a story or having a story be told. And then this can branch off into a number of different other cultural realities from different ethnic groups that can utilize this way as a way to tell their stories.
We have to end now, but I want to just read a final comment from Swarnima saying, as a PhD student from India with an interest in narrative identity and psychotherapy, I resonated strongly with the relational ethics made visible here. Thank you so much for opening up this space for individuals internationally. And I want to echo that thanks. Something that was said in your presentation was that health behavior change will take place one story at a time. And your unfolding story and the way that you chose to tell it tonight with such authenticity and commitment to yourselves. And I think I don't know about everybody else, but I think it really resonated. I think about what power means and the power for stories to influence, for structural change. And your lab offering a vision of a different kind of structure of how we can do academia, and what each of us that attended tonight will take back with us to our own structures for the benefit of our health and our lives. Our lives matter. Yeah. So thank you. Thank you everybody for coming.
Yeah, thank you for joining us.
Thank you so
Yes,
much.
thank you all so much.
This is the first time we've ever talked about this outside of our group formally, and no better place than SQIP and with all of you. So thank you so much.
And thank you for all the work. You guys have inspired us all. So thank you
Yes.
for your work, really.
Yes. Be well. Take care.
We hope to see some of you back next month for our second virtual salon, which will be about the listening guide, a voice-centered relational method, on October 25th. So stay tuned for the promotions on that, and see you all later. Bye.
Yeah,
Okay.
bye-bye.
Thank you so much for your
Thank
leadership.
you.